Hi, everybody. It's Dina at the Realize Foundation, and I have a special guest today, Brian Townsend. He has been he has spent 28 years in DEA and police work in all over our country, from what I was reading. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation today about the drug part of suicide and how we can help mitigate that, or how we can be more knowledgeable about it. So welcome, Brian. I'd love for you to share anything else about yourself you'd like to share.
Thanks, Dina. Happy to be here. So yeah, my name is Brian Townsend. I spent the last 28 years of my life in law enforcement, the majority of that time with the DEA. I was a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration for the last 23 years of my career. Had various assignments. I started my career in Arkansas. I was there for about 10 years. And then I went down to South Texas, Corpus Christi in the southwest border for almost 7 years. And then I went to Quantico, Virginia, where our training academy is. And I spent about 4 years there. I was in charge of most in-service training. And then my last 2 years, I returned to Missouri, where I was the resident agent in charge of the Springfield, Missouri office, and in charge of DEA operations in the southwest counties that we were responsible for. So after my retirement, I did a couple things. I started my own training and consulting business, Eagle 6 Training, which I still do. And then I went to work for a risk system called the Mid-States Organized Crime Information Center, MOCIC, where I still work for them as a law enforcement training coordinator, working with law enforcement in 9 states in the Midwest. And a lot of my initial work with them was drug work, drug classes, informants, surveillance, things like that. And that led to the development of a fentanyl class. And my expertise with opioids, specifically fentanyl, just ultimately led to the starting of Only 2MG, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness of not only fentanyl, but other emerging public health threats. So that keeps me pretty busy as well. Last year, I was able to do 54 presentations. I just did number 100 earlier this week in Maine, which was a special milestone for me. So 100 times I've been able to give what I call my flagship presentation. I've done several more than 100, or many more than 100, but 100 of the main presentation, and just trying to do my part in raising awareness and hopefully create force multipliers to take the conversations into their own homes and their own communities and raise awareness.
Yeah. So when you're doing these presentations, are they mostly to the law enforcement or first responder community?
That's the majority of my audience, but they are certainly not the only audience in the room. Because of my 3-decade career in law enforcement, and because of my contacts in law enforcement, that's typically who I first call, because quite simply, it's a venue, right? It's a training room that I can usually get access to for free. So as a trainer, that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I always ask the departments to open them up to the public, and unless it's an in-service training, they always say yes, which is wonderful. So a lot of folks in the public health, a lot of first responders, nurses, doctors, school officials, teachers. I would love to have more parents in the room, but I have found, and it's very frustrating, that most parents, they don't want to have this conversation, unfortunately, until it's too late.
Yeah, I feel like that's the same when you talk about suicide. It's hard to have the conversation. And I think one of the biggest things I learned in the beginning of this journey is that it's always okay to ask somebody if they're suicidal. And I think I was hesitant to do that in the beginning. And I have some first responders that have been on our board and very involved in this mission. And they're like, no, we ask everybody every time we go to a call. That is like one of the questions. And it's not planting an idea in someone's head. And I think that it should be the same for what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I've had numerous parents tell me, out of sight, out of mind. Like you said, you hit the nail on the head there. Planting the seed, and that's just absolutely not what it's doing. It's raising awareness and letting people know that it's okay to have these feelings. It's okay to talk to people. It's okay to seek help. That's what we want people to do, right? Don't battle these things alone.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest problem in my mind is people thinking they're alone and trying to get them to have conversations or read somebody's story, or interact with another human in some way really does help with those feelings, whether it's addiction or suicidal thoughts. And I had a battle with alcohol when I was younger, and I spent 23 years hiding my suicide attempt. So I don't have any qualms about telling people that, because I could have gotten help a lot sooner if I was willing to talk about it. And if that's why I'm so passionate about our books and our podcast, because if I could have read somebody's chapter who had been through a similar thing and I had a way to reach out to them and talk to them, I probably would have spoken up a lot sooner.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's such a stigma to these things that it really prevents people from seeking help. And we need to reduce that in this country. We need to reduce the stigma and let people know that this
Mhm.
isn't some type of personal or moral failing. This is real. These are emotions. These are, for whatever reason, people are having these different feelings, whether it's suicide or whether it's just drug use. Let's encourage them to ask for help, or at least just talk to someone and take that first step. And unfortunately, it's frustrating. I know in the drug world, the stigma is, we use words like junkie and addict, and we know that most people who want treatment just don't seek it because they don't want to put themselves out there for the embarrassment or the harassment or whatever that they feel is going to come along with those feelings. And so they keep it inside, right? And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's horrible. If I had a wish, it would be that we could reduce stigma and allow people to just be human and help other people.
I agree with that. And I think every human on the planet has something they're struggling with. And it might not be drugs or suicide, but they're struggling with something. It could be financial, it could be family, or friends, not getting along. It could be something as simple as, you know, you don't like your job, that is causing you angst around so many things. So I think it's important that people know that there are circles and communities that talk about these things on a regular basis, even though they might not know that. As somebody who's an alcoholic, they might not know about AA. They might not know about NA for narcotics, and I think sometimes I personally have had people on this podcast and people who've written in our books who have attributed to their life being saved from AA because of the community and the support they had. So if we can plug people into more communities that can help them understand, that some other people are going through the same thing.
Yeah, the community, the support, that's everything. And when people feel alone, it just makes things worse. It's a wonderful outlet when you can share your emotions or your experiences with folks that understand. I tell you, that's been a struggle with connecting at times, at least originally, with what I'm doing, because I came in to a sector as the law enforcement officer, and there's a lot of folks uh, in this area that they've had bad experiences with law enforcement officers.
Mhm.
They equate it with going to jail or something that was negative in their life, and I can't tell you how many early on how many folks especially in the treatment and recovery field who had no interest in talking to me. And I'm sure there's probably still some out there, but once they realize what my heart is and where my passion is, we break those barriers, and that's important. But been asked several times, why do I do this? And because most of the folks that are working with other folks in this, like I said, in recovery or treatment, are typically folks who've experienced, recovery and treatment, and I'm unique in that sense.
Yeah. What made you get into law enforcement?
I wanted to help people. I just I felt like it was my calling and an interest in being in law enforcement, specifically drug enforcement. I didn't know as a teenager, I had no idea what that looked like. I didn't how to accomplish those goals. But and then once I had the DEA in mind, I had no idea how I was going to accomplish that. But things just worked out. I worked hard and tried to make good decisions, and I lived my dream. I'm very proud of the work I did, and um, I love DEA. It's a great organization. I love the mission, but I also feel like there was some other things in my life I needed to do. So
Yeah.
I left, and I'm doing them now.
Yeah. I don't know if you could share anything about this, but it would be interesting to hear, like, what, when you were working with the DEA, what did a day look like for you?
There's a lot of freedom in this job. Everyone is special agents have caseloads, investigations, and it's not uncommon to have several at a time, and you have to prioritize your time, your time management, and um, a lot of analytical work, a lot of interviews, a lot of surveillance. Just putting every case is a little different, and just trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together to create the best investigation you can, and forward that to the U.S. Attorney's Office for hopefully prosecution, and then you have to see that through. So no day was ever the same. How's that? It was. I think that was pretty neat experience. Is every day was a little different. Some days were very long because of it.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, what do you, when you talk to people about fentanyl, what are you talking about, or what awareness or facts are you giving them that maybe our audience here could benefit from?
So when I do my 4-hour presentation, I call it the kitchen sink. I really try to be as comprehensive as possible. Having the luxury of doing something 100 times, presenting a class 100 times, I can anticipate the questions and the feedback that I'm going to get. So I've been able to work that into my presentation. And not that I don't get new questions, but for the most part, it's pretty comprehensive and it covers what people want to know. But I start with some numbers. I want people to understand that we lose about 300 Americans every day to drugs in this country, and the majority of those folks are because of one drug. I say this a lot, and it's just the truth. I've never seen a drug more impactful than fentanyl. In 30 years of law enforcement, never seen a drug change the landscape. Casual drug use, drug experimentation. About 2/3 of all people dying from drugs are dying from fentanyl. And to give you some more perspective, the government calls these overdoses, I call them drug poisonings. And we've been capturing this data in this country since 1968. And from 1968 to the year 2000, we lost about 208,000 people. A lot of people over a 32-year span. We now lose 100,000 people every year. Every year. So in 2 years, we lost more. The last 2 years, we lost more than people than we did the first 32 years of capturing this data. So I want them to understand the gravity of those numbers. They're not just numbers, those are people. Those are our kids, our family, our friends. And then from there, I talk about substance use disorder, addiction. I think it's important. I think it's important to understand what's happening. And part of the reason I do that is because I want to break some of the barriers down of the stigma that's attached to drug use.
Mm-hmm.
So I just give them, a little bit of information on what's happening. The dopamine release, the tolerance, the addiction, the dependence, and from there I go into kind of the historical context. How did fentanyl enter our drug supply? And so I talk about a little bit of history and how ultimately it came through heroin, and that's my first part. And then my second part, I dive deeper into what fentanyl is. The fact that only 2 milligrams, which is only a couple granules of salt or sand, a lot of people don't realize that, is enough to kill you, and how deadly it is, and how it's tasteless, it's odorless, and how it's in the majority of our drug supply. So a lot of folks who are dying now from cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin, if you can still find it, are dying actually from fentanyl because it only takes a little bit to kill you. I talk about the exposure myth, the fact that being around fentanyl, even touching fentanyl, will not kill you. Especially when there's law enforcement in the room. 99% of law enforcement officers already know this, but there's still this perception out there in the public and in some law enforcement that just being around fentanyl will kill you. And it's certainly a dangerous drug, and I certainly want people to take precautions and use common sense and appropriate PPE. But I think it's important to dispel that myth as well. And then I talk about, pretty much, well, not pretty much. I talk about China, the supply chain, how the chemicals go to Mexico, specifically the drug cartels. The main two ones down there are the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation, the CJ&G, and how the drugs are smuggled into the U.S., how much they cost, how they sell them on social media or the dark web. I mean, it's a very comprehensive presentation. So, and that's my main presentation. Just worth noting that I also do a lunch and learn, which is an hour, because I've had a lot of, especially executives, tell me when I reach out to different businesses that hey, we don't have 4 hours. What can you give us? Just scratch the surface. So I developed a lunch and learn. We cater lunch and I just give them an hour of the basics. And it's funny, a lot of them will end up signing up for a 4 hour because they want more. And then I do I call it Shattering Dreams. It's specifically written for young people. So I've done it for middle school, high school, and college age students, several thousand last year and already a few thousand this year. And again, that's more of, I'm not going to bore them with the stats or bore them with the history. It's just more of the fact that, hey, you have to be aware that this dangerous drug is in our drug supply, and it's killing people from first-time drug use. And you might think you're getting a Percocet, you might think you're getting Oxy, you might think you're getting cocaine, but there's a good chance that you're going to get, fentanyl, and it's killed a lot of folks the first time they've ever used it, because, like I said, a mere 2 milligrams is enough to kill the average human being. So
that's just crazy. So yeah. Is this something that China just created, like in however long ago this started, or did it come from somewhere else?
Yes. So fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, so it's man-made, and to give you a Reader's Digest version of the history, we changed pain management in this country in 1996. The way we manage pain to this day is different as of 1996. Like, we know the date. And that's when we added pain as a fifth vital sign. And we also had Purdue release OxyContin. They weren't alone, but they were the main contributor. So then we went from, prior to 1996, if you had an opioid prescription in this country, statistically speaking, I'm not saying there's not some outliers there, but statistically speaking, you were probably dying. And in 1996, we were led to believe that opioids were safe and that quote, less than 1% would become addicted, end quote. So we had a rise in legal opioid use, and we overnight started to see people die from legal opioids. And then that turned into a greater or an increased use of heroin. In fact, we hadn't seen that type of heroin increase in this country since the Vietnam War. So the drug traffickers were like, all right, the Americans want more heroin. We've got to cut it with something, because you never sell, 100% raw product. So fentanyl was the perfect cut. And I mean that, why I say perfect cut is because it's an opioid. The qualities, the traits, probably not the proper word I'm using, but it's the same principle as heroin, right? It's an opioid. Mm-hmm. So, and it's cheap. It's like I said, it's man-made. It's completely synthetic. So it's more potent, it's cheaper, and it's highly addictive. And that's why they put it in our drug supply. So it just took over heroin. And, heroin is very difficult to find in the United States. It's not impossible, but if you look at all the seizures, they've gone down substantially. Heroin seizures have, from the border all the way up to all the states. And so fentanyl took over. And then from there, it went into the pills, the Oxys, the Adderall, the Xanax. It doesn't have to be an opioid. If there's a pill, there's a counterfeit. If there's a counterfeit, there's going to be, fentanyl or methamphetamine or some type of poison in it. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it started getting into our cocaine. Now, as of 2023, about 41% of our cocaine supply now has fentanyl in it. And then it got into our methamphetamine. As of 2023, about 17% of our methamphetamine now has fentanyl in it. So it's estimated that about 70% of our drug supply now has fentanyl in it, which is really hard for me to wrap my head around that number. And I don't think people understand the devastating impact. And that's why, I start with those numbers, and that's why it's worth noting again that, about 250 to 300 Americans die every year, and the majority of them are going to die because of one drug.
It's crazy. So people who have maybe had some of those other drugs before, they're just taking them now, and they're getting fentanyl when they don't know, and it's killing them.
Yeah, especially the pills, especially young people in the pills. And we always tell people if it's not from a real doctor or from a real pharmacy, not some online place, but if it's not from a real doctor or a real pharmacy, then assume it's fake, assume it's fatal, assume that it's going to have fentanyl or methamphetamine in it. DEA tests the pills out there, and when they contain fentanyl, 5 out of 10 now contain at least 2 milligrams. It was 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 pills. And as of November, it reduced to 5, which is still high. I say reduced, but that's kind of a silly word. We're still talking about half the pill supply out there that tests positive for fentanyl has at least 2 milligrams. And I can't stress this enough. 2 milligrams will kill the average human being.
It's crazy. And kids probably only don't even need that much because they're smaller and lower weight. I mean, I'm guessing that plays a part.
It does. And you think about what 2 milligrams is. Like I said, it's only a couple granules of salt or sand. So it's only a couple specks. So there's several cases out there where people will go, they'll go on Snapchat and they'll buy an Oxy or something, and they'll just split it in half. And one child takes one half and the other child takes the other half, and one child dies because you don't know within that pill where that fentanyl is going to be hiding. I always take a sugar packet. Most sugar packets are about 1 gram. So 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. So if that sugar packet were fentanyl and it had 1,000 milligrams of fentanyl in it, and we know that 2 milligrams is a deadly dose, that means that little fentanyl or that little sugar packet would have 500 deadly doses in it. So a lot of times when I talk, especially to young people, I'll actually pour 1 packet of sugar into a little vial, and I'll pass it around because I want them to physically see how little it takes to kill so many people, and how easy it is for that to just camouflage itself into our drug supply. And fair or not, people that are experimenting with drugs now, they can die from first-time drug use. We never had that before. We were in high school. If you died from first-time drug use, I mean, you had a better chance of winning the lottery, right? And now it's happening quite a bit, and we've never seen that before. And that's why I say it's the most impactful drug I've ever encountered. It's not even the most dangerous drug, but it's certainly the most impactful.
It's just crazy to me how accessible this is to kids. Like, is it? Do you think a lot of that is because of social media?
Yeah, we know that the traffickers are using social media to not only sell, but to recruit, easy money, right? Come be a drug dealer. Mm-hmm. Social media is a big factor. It seems like at least the last year, I used to be pretty hard on them, companies like Meta, Facebook, and Instagram, but I can say in the last year, they've certainly done a lot more than they historically have. And I really hope they continue to do more. But, it's easy to buy drugs on social media. I'm confident that you could put me in any city in the U.S. and within a week, I would have drugs in my hand, just social media, Snapchat, Instagram, Kick. I mean, there's so many really dangerous platforms that are very easy to obtain drugs. So, and our kids, they grew up on these apps, right? And so they're well aware of it, or they're exposed to it a lot more than we ever were.
So if you had a group of parents in front of you, what is the best advice you would give them?
Talk to your children. I 100% talk to your children. I mean, the studies, the research, it's crystal clear. In fact, the last one I was reading, 50% of kids who have had drug discussions by their parents don't use drugs. And I know 50 may not be a lot, but hey, I'll take 1%. Mm-hmm. I really will, because like I said earlier, I've had so many parents tell me out of sight, out of mind, and it's so depressing that they would have that way of thinking. Just simply talk to your kids, be involved, be a parent, understand, the challenges that they have, and look at their phones, be a parent. And I know we want to be friends to our kids. I get it, but you can also be a parent as well. They deserve that, and they need that.
Yeah.
And just having a simple conversation. There's a commercial. I think it's in New Mexico, and I play it at the end of my presentation. It's like 20 seconds long, and it's beginning a conversation. And the reason I play it is because I want people to realize that this isn't hard. We're not we're not returning astronauts to the Earth. I mean, we are literally just saying, just having a conversation. And I would say that's the same thing for suicide and sex and anything else out there that that we're struggling with. Just have this conversation. It's not going to open up a it's not going to enable them to do something. It's going to let them know that you care about them and that there's resources available, and that that you care about them.
Yeah, I agree. And when I was a kid, I wouldn't have gotten away with any of that stuff. But we also didn't have social media back then. It's a little different these days.
It certainly is. They grow up with the cell phones, and that worries me as well, because it's the communication and the lack of civility and just decency that we have towards each other. Because we're getting used to having conversations when you don't have to actually face to face the person. And
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I think that makes it easier to cope with your struggles with drugs or alcohol, because we've neglected the ability to talk to each other and actually establish real relationships.
Agreed. And I think that hurts everybody in many ways. We need human interaction to be okay in general. And I think it's really frustrating when people feel so isolated from the pandemic, and then social media kind of made that just stretch out longer, because you could catch up with people on social media and text while you're in your bed, and you don't even have to be on camera or see anyone face to face. And it's hard to know if your friends and family are okay in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. It's nothing beats face-to-face interaction with friends or family, or strangers for that matter.
Just
I think
opening the door for somebody or saying hello is, you never know how much impact that's going to have on somebody who's having a bad day.
Absolutely agree.
My last question for you is about, you probably have a lot of knowledge to know, what can we do about this, if anything? I mean, I know it's hard to control, obviously, but what can we do about it?
Well, I think there's a holistic approach. I do believe that law enforcement plays a role in this. We've identified the top two cartels bringing fentanyl into the United States, and I think we need to remain aggressive in disrupting or dismantling these organizations. And we know a lot of these chemicals come from places like China, and we need to be aggressive there as well. But ultimately, it's interesting is it's easy for me to demonize the pharmaceutical industry or drug traffickers and all that stuff, but our demand for drugs is unlike any other in the world. And you think about, we make about 4% of the world's population, yet we consume most of the drugs. So I really feel like we're putting a Band-Aid on a lot of what we do. We're never really talking about the root cause. Was there trauma? Was there physical, sexual, mental abuse? Why are people turning to drugs and alcohol, especially young people? One of the things that they do, for at least for drugs, is they do medicated assisted treatment. It's two things. One is you're trying to wean them off the drugs, and number two is you're trying to figure out, why do they use drugs? What kind of, is there something cognitive there? Is there something that we can, some type of therapy or something? And I think that's what we need to do as a country, is figure out, is have those discussions. What's turning people to cope with trauma or mental illness with drugs or alcohol, right?
Mhm.
And number two is I think we just need to continue to talk, like I said, with the advice I would give to parents. And that's something I tell all my audiences is I truly hope that, well, one is I hope you learned a lot from my presentation, but I truly hope you take this information back and you talk to your kids and your family and your, I don't know, Rotary Club, church, whatever. You have this conversation. Don't bury your head in the sand because when you pull it out, it's going to be too late, and that's never good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I think it's really vital for people to understand more.
And my pleasure. I appreciate the time and happy to contribute any way I can.
Awesome. I'm going to have to send you one of our books if you can.
Yes, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Okay. I'm going to, I just appreciate you being here. So thank you.
thank you.